You're listening to an IOE Podcast.
Powered by UCL Minds.
This is Research for the Real World. Conversations with researchers about the paths they've taken to shape our everyday lives.
This is Research for the Real World, conversations with researchers about the paths they've taken to help shape everyday lives. Hello, I'm Dr. Amy Harrison. I'm an Associate Professor in Psychology at the Department of Psychology and Human Development at the IOE, UCL's Faculty of Education and Society. I research cognitive and social emotional factors involved in the onset and maintenance of eating disorders.
And I am Dr. Marta Francesconi. I am a lecturer in psychology, also based in the Department of Psychology and Human Development at the IOE. I'm mainly interested in researching factors that are predictive of mental health problems in children and adolescents. In this season of Research for the Real World, we are discussing how the cost of living and food insecurity is affecting children and young people's life chances, specifically food banks in schools and the impact of economic crisis in children's learning.
We're delighted to have Professor Gary McCulloch in the studio today to chew the fat about school meals, specifically the UK's school meals service and their impact on communities from the early 1900s to today. Gary is Brian Simon Professor of the History of Education and the founding director of the International Centre for Historical Research in Education at the IOE. He's previously been president of the British Educational Research Association and the UK History of Education Society, as well as the editor of the British Journal of Educational Studies and the International Journal of the History of Education.
Gary's research interests include the social history of secondary and higher education and the many facets that involve the theory, policy, and teaching in the history of education. So welcome to the podcast, Gary.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with you.
So firstly, as a bit of an icebreaker, we would like to hear how did you become interested in education?
That's a very interesting question. I think it's probably mainly when I was at college, when I was a student myself, as an undergraduate and a postgraduate, I became particularly interested in the processes of education. I was already interested in history. I was doing a history undergraduate degree, and then I did history PhD. But being at Cambridge, with all of the different aspects around Cambridge life and culture, the institutions there, plus being there at a very interesting time of educational change broadly, having gone to a grammar school and seeing the products of many public schools at Cambridge, these things really interested me in terms of what they meant socially. So the combination of history and education seemed very natural to me. The history of education wasn't something that I simply lapsed into. It was actually, now I look back at it, quite a good choice for me to develop. And I'm very pleased I've been able to fashion a key area for that.
What an amazing career. So let's start from the beginning, especially for our listeners who don't come from the UK. Gary, what is the school meals service and why did it start?
Well, the school meals service is basically, it's intended to be a national service providing school meals for children. That's it in a nutshell. It's much more complicated than that now and always has been all the way through its history. Formally, its history goes back to 1906 in terms of the legislation. It was provided for the first time for funding to be provided as necessary for elementary school children to have access to facilities for milk and meals in England and Wales. Scotland followed a couple of years later. And since then, there's been legislation of various types to support this in different ways, but it's gone through different kinds of phases. And we can look at those perhaps in more detail about how those did affect the children at the different stages in its history.
That's fascinating. Can you tell us about your research project on the school meals service that was funded by the ESRC?
I'll be delighted to. The ESRC gave very generous funding for this project, which is both historical and ethnographic in its character. So very grateful to the ESRC for its support. It's a project which is interinstitutional. That is, it's led by the IOE UCL together with universities of Wolverhampton and Sheffield. My investigators are Heather Ellis in Sheffield and Gopinder Lally at Wolverhampton. And we've recruited 3 excellent researchers, one for each institution, to support the project. So together we make what's now a very good team of 6 researchers, each looking at different aspects of this project. Strand 1, led by the IOE, looks at the policy history of the school meals service since 1906, making use particularly of documentary evidence, of which there's a huge amount, which we're digging into in different archives. Strand 2, led at the University of Sheffield, is on the social history, which looks at the community and the schools, and the children, the parents, the dinner ladies, everyone who has been involved in the school meals service, particularly making use of oral history interviews. And Strand 3, led at the University of Wolverhampton with Gopinder, is an ethnographic case study, 4 case study schools looking at the social practices of school meals today and trying to see whether they could take advantage of the lessons of the past, of the experience of this service over the last 100 years.
Thank you very much. This really sounds like a fascinating and comprehensive project. Since you mentioned it, would you tell us more about the impact of the school meal service on schools and their communities since the inception of the service in 1906 in terms of its aims, achievements, and limitations?
Thank you. Yes, I would divide the impact of the service on the children in 3 different phases of its development. Phase 1, I would say, from 1906 to the 1944 Education Act, when it was a very minimalist service, intended not to cost any money really overall, and leaving it to the local education authorities rather than the Board of Education to say whether there was any need for A, school meals at all, B, free school meals, and C, support with milk. This led it to be very haphazard and very low-key. Many parts of the country didn't see any support from it at all. Even the disadvantaged areas, in many cases, didn't get much benefit from it. A big sea change in attitude during the Second World War for reasons around food rationing and changing social attitudes. And the 1944 Education Act set out to provide much more in terms of a national support for school meals. It was to become much more of a social institution, really more of a part of the school curriculum for all schools, and something which would provide in a much more systematic way for it to be part of the new welfare state of the 1940s and 1950s and 1960s. That was challenged more and more, so that by 1980 we entered into phase 3, which tended to lead to the service being again made into a permissive type of approach. Marketisation took a really strong hold over it, and so it became again very varied in its role in different parts of the country, depending on support in different ways in different local areas. And so that's where we are now, I think. We're encountering more and more debates around the last 5 or 10 years, local initiatives around what the future of it should be, whether we should carry on with the current provision or whether there's some other kind of way in which we could go forward, whether there could be a phase 4.
Absolutely fascinating. What's been the social experience of free school meals, do you think?
Free school meals really has had a number of different kinds of aspects socially. It's been a mixture, a roller coaster really, of emotions and sensations, you could say. At the root of it, there's the there's the hunger. The front headline aspect of school meals has to be hungry children. And that's been the draw card of it right from the start, something which has raised it above other areas of welfare provision. Been the image of hungry children going through their childhood, their everyday school days, with nothing much to eat, finding it very hard to learn as a result. But at the same time, there's been the distaste of many children for the school meals. Many children and adults have got memories of themselves being force-fed into eating all sorts of things which they didn't really like. Maybe you yourselves have got these kinds of memories. I certainly do from my own school days, of really very variable kinds of food, and with,
I remember the cornflake
avoidable even
cakes.
to this day. Even to this day, I can't eat lumpy custard, and I associate it with my school days. And I always say that, along with the 11 plus examination, school food is probably the one thing that everybody remembers from their own school days, and has got some kind of story to say about it. But there's also not just those, but also a shame and embarrassment which is being associated with free school meals. Again, I remember I myself had free school meals for a while, and my mother was a very proud mother. She hated the idea that I could have school meals, with my other siblings as well. And, that becomes a very kind of personal account. And that also draws on its prehistory in the poor law and its status as a charity. Many people historically haven't liked having to take charity. It's a very personal and again a very emotional kind of thing. So many of these things and others we're picking up from our interviews, from the literature as well, the primary literature, and to see the very vivid stories that you can tell about the development of school meals from the point of view of the children themselves.
That's very interesting. I wasn't raised in the UK, so to me it's like a whole new world. It's very, very interesting to learn about it. Can we consider the post-war years from 1940s to the 1970s as the golden age of the school meal service?
It's tempting to in some ways, but simply because it looks so different from what went before 1944 and what went after in 1980. Those middle years seem to be a period when they were really trying to do something different, something radical and interesting, which would improve society and the role of schools in society. Of course, historians are always suspicious of golden years, and I think they're right to be so, because the actual picture, when you start to look at it more closely, is more complex than that. In reality, although there were very inflated hopes for the school meal service, it was a very expensive thing to do properly. The fact that they still needed the local authorities to take a lead of it meant that some schools were doing it very well, while other schools didn't do it so well. It is very uneven from that point of view. The nutritional value of the meals was very varied. The educational value of the meals, which they hoped to really develop further, the idea that they would improve as citizens, that they would be able to learn how to be good citizens by conversing at the dinner table and using their knives and forks properly. All of that was very varied indeed. So places like, for example, Swansea was very keen on this new development being a great social institution. But actually, Swansea in the 1950s and 1960s wasn't particularly good for school meals. There are a lot of criticisms made about it. Maybe the greatest area of success for school meals in that period was in the rural areas rather than the urban areas, because in the rural areas they could maybe get everybody together in the same space. There was more provision for the local foods, and they could be more part of the school curriculum. Whereas in the urban areas is much more varied and very much up and down. So that's a possibility which we're trying to explore a bit more at the moment.
Fascinating. I mean, aside from my own experiences of eating school meals, I remember the green custard, the cornflake cakes. This is a real journey back and a nostalgic experience. However, there's a much more serious side to this and the development of the service. And I guess I'm wondering, are there lessons to be learned from the past experiences of the school meals service for the future provision of school meals, suited really to the rapidly changing conditions of the 21st century? So we've got the cost of living crisis and increasing reliance on free school meals, food banks, and so on.
Yes, very much so. This is a very important part of the project, that the history isn't just for its own sake, it's for what it can tell us about how to make use of that experience. So this is something that we're wanting to tease out a lot more as we go along. I think it's important to make sure that we do not go outside our own kind of context. It's very, historical lessons can be overdone as well. So it's important to say that. But I think, for example, we can try to make the point that there's been an entanglement of the kinds of economic priorities which are often set for school meals with the social needs for school meals. I think that's an important point. It is an expensive policy, and it's not always recognised as an educational policy either. So the Treasury, ever since at least the 1950s, has been trying to reduce the amount of funding for school meals in various ways and to manage the decline of school meals as a service. I think you can see that as a thing. So importantly, I think that in order to develop in the future as a recognised part of the school service, its educational purposes have to be really emphasised as a key part of it and shown to be important. Also, I think that the health aspects of it need to be emphasised, its role in nutrition. Ever since the 1980 Education Act put the responsibility for nutrition increasingly on the local educational authorities, our loss of a vision for the nutrition of the service again has been lost. And so emphasising the health aspects of it. And again, the educational aspect of it too is really important, how it makes a difference to school children's learning after lunch, as opposed to if they haven't had any lunch at all, and really coming down with clear and accurate documentation of these kinds of things. But I think also recognising that each of these phases constituted a compromise between different sorts of aspects, and that if we do develop a new approach, say in the next 5 years or so, what kinds of compromises will that involve? It may not be something which is clear cut in the way that individuals, activists, or even academics might want, but a compromise between different social, economic, and cultural factors, as has been the case in the past.
Gary, I was also wondering about what might be some of the very contemporary considerations around the school meals service. I'm thinking about the fact that we know that lots more children are experiencing food allergies, and also our schools are very diverse places with children from all different backgrounds. And how does the school meals service operate in that context?
Well, it's fascinating, actually. We're finding lots of different stories around the different allergies to particular foods that have affected children around the country, really, over the years. The extent of those allergies, whether they are simply individual or may have affected the whole school in some cases, and what was done to try to address those problems when they did find them. There certainly are some instances, at least, and one could say that it was fortunate that at least in all appearances there didn't seem to be an extreme situation. Although again, we'll be able to say more about that as we look further into that. I think also the problems with what often seem to be upset stomachs as a result of eating the food, and the problems which that could raise with the learning. But also at a cultural level as well, that the traditional pattern of school meals, meat and two veg, very English, arguably very stodgy kind of variety, the single types of meat as well, that may have been something in the 1940s, but with the increasing diversification of English society in the 1950s, 1960s and onwards, that basic pattern was very often not seen to be in the interest of particular ethnic groups, and very, very often complaints made by parents and by the children themselves of being obliged to eat something that's completely outside their own culture. The natural complaints, of course, and that itself became another challenge to this so-called golden age of the 1940s and 1950s, that many different groups in society really weren't wanting to accept that anymore. And so another way arguably needed to be found in the needs of the market, which were emphasised from the 1980s.
And what do you make of current provisions like the Mayor of London's funding for free school meals for primary school children?
Thank you. Yes, the Mayor's provision for free school meals in London is a very interesting initiative, and it's part and parcel of the growing debate about school meals and free school meals, which has developed in the last 10 years especially. Often that's been based on different kind of local experiments, and that's been very much in the running of the tradition of school meals in the past. In this particular case, London's very often been in the forefront of providing school meals. That was the case before the Second World War with the London County Council, when they did much more than many other areas did in the country. So it's living up to its past, if you could say, in that kind of way. But also it may be the forerunner of a new approach towards school meals in the future. There you could see that it's joining forces with the regionalisation of school meals, which you can see in Wales and in Scotland as well, that these are challenging the provision, which is fairly well set now, which has been the case in England now for several decades. It may be that those regions are providing us with new instruments, new ideas about how to deal with this on a more national basis. So I think it's very interesting indeed, and we look forward to seeing the outcomes of that over the next year or so.
Yeah, we are looking forward to the outcomes too. So, what is next for the project, and also any other things that are on your radar?
We're really heavily into the data collection at the moment. All of us are going around the country in our various ways, collecting lots and lots of data, which we intended to be, as really needs to be, at first priority. There's a huge amount of data to be collected. And then in the second year of the project, which will start next year, to get much more into the writing and the dissemination, the conferences, going to different places, sharing in our ideas, learning from other projects which are in related areas. Learning also, I think, from what's going on internationally. I think that there's an international story to tell here, which is of the variation, the very widely varied histories and experiences of school meals, which you find in different countries around Europe, in America, in Asia, in Australia, and New Zealand, and trying to connect up with those. In fact, that might well be a next project, which could be done as a world history of school meals, which would be great fun.
That is absolutely amazing to think about that international context. Thank you so much, Gary. It's been really interesting to revisit your incredible career and to really hear about this area of research. And I particularly enjoyed thinking about how this policy has gone on for, years, decades, and has had quite a few different guises and been manifested in quite a few different ways. And it's really demonstrated its importance. And the research that you've done has really highlighted for the policymakers the importance of making these meals available to children. And it really resonates with my own research focus, because we know that people that go without food, even for 3 or 4 hours, start to have impacts on their cognitive abilities. And so it just is so important in the school context to make sure that children have enough food. And it's also, on the other hand, a bit shocking that we have to consider things like this in the modern day and age. So thank you so much for your work and the really great impact it's had on lots of children over the years. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
I'm most grateful for that, and to both Amy and to Marta your excellent questions, if I may say so, and for sharing this session with me today. And can I offer my congratulations to the IOE for this excellent series on research for the real world, which I think is so important for us all today to learn from.
You can follow the research project on X, the website formerly known as Twitter, at ESRC School Meals to learn more. Some of what we have covered today is also available on the episode notes.
If you've enjoyed this episode, we have an archive of 20 past seasons. Search IOE Podcast to find episodes of research for the real world, as well as more podcasts from the IOE.
And a quick favor before you go, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we'd really appreciate if you could give the IOE podcast a rating. 5-star would be nice if you are enjoying the show. That would help us to reach more people who are interested in hearing about such important work.
I'm Amy.
And I am Marta. And thanks for listening. Bye.
Research for the Real World is produced by IOE Marketing and Communications and IOE Research Development. The theme music was created by Rob Cochran. Tatiana Sotero Diaz is the series advisor, Amy Leibowitz is the series producer, and Jason Ilagan is the executive producer of the IOE podcast.
Thanks so much for downloading and listening to this IOE podcast.